I thought I'd dive straight in and talk about communities of practice. So I, as part of my role and what I do sort of day to day, is to try and build like a community of practice. What does that mean? Well, it means creating a group of people with shared goals and knowledge and interests and putting them together in a way where they can share that information, almost like an information radiator outwards. This is what I think a community of practice is, right? They're like-minded individuals. I think a community of practice needs to have clearly defined sort of ways to engage with a community of practice, so you know how to engage with this group of people that are typically subject matter experts. So for me, the group of people are delivery managers, and what my job is to try and build almost, if it was technology, if the people were technology and the knowledge was the kind of APIs, it would be an accelerator, right? And the idea is that this group of people, this nucleus, they have between them collective experience within a similar field, in this case delivery. And what I try and do is build around them assets and processes and ways with which they can radiate that information outwards to those that want to learn. Now, for me, that's a community of practice. So often organisations and businesses will want to create a community of practice similar to that in various disciplines within their organisation, whether they have an engineering function, whether they have a delivery function, whether they have a project manager function. It can be quite efficient to tailor your operating model into communities of practice. You can simplify the ways of working because you're bundling people up into similarly themed buckets. To use another analogy, if we were talking sort of agile structure, these groups of people would be the epics. The outcome is their experience, right? And you're trying to tap into that. So wherever you are in the business, you can go to a community of practice based on a particular field and quickly learn everything that you need to, or interface with them to get help, advice and guidance on that particular thing. So what I want to talk about is a delivery manager community of practice, but you can apply this for anyone wanting to kind of set up a community of practice. Often it's architecture, because architecture in technology is so broad and covers so many things, whether it's enterprise architecture or cloud architecture or platform architecture, and the demarcation of which is often quite subjective and not very clearly demarked, and that's even more so in organisations that don't have clear thinking around this type of sort of complex topic like architecture. So often I'm asked, well, how do you build like an architecture community of practice? Or we have clients, or I have clients that ask, can you build an architecture community of practice? So what I'm going to talk about, you can apply broadly. And the scenario was that a colleague and a friend kind of asked or went through their project and what they were trying to do, and asked, you know, what would you do? And I've done this a couple of times. I've done this recently, and I've done this accidentally with my own kind of group of delivery managers and learned as I've gone. And I've also done this once previously for another client and another organisation. So I wanted to talk about that. And the way that I pass information on is I'm really practical. I don't want to get lost in the nuances of what is a community of practice and what is it versus a centre of excellence, and where does it sit in a TOGAF operating model. And you know, I don't want to do any of that because it just bores me to death. What I want to do is say, here's my interpretation of what a community of practice is, and here are the steps to kind of execute what I think you need to do if you want to set one up. So let's go through that. So I reckon there's probably 8 things to consider when you're building out a community of practice, and these are the things that I think, I'll use that term I always use, kind of weaponized, almost like a turnkey, here's how I would do it, and here's what I've observed typically works with people. I think the first thing you need to do is probably get the buy-in. At organisational level, doing this requires effort and time and actual investment in those things, plus probably money too. The problem with setting up communities of practice is typically any given business has its day-to-day job to do, and these folk have their day-to-day jobs. Building a community of practice from scratch is both a combination of kind of practical things which we'll go through, but also organic kind of time needed to kind of gel people together, and I think sometimes that's forgotten about. And consultants will roll up to a client, and actually the notion and understanding of what a community of practice takes to actually achieve is missed or glossed over or not even spoken about. It's with my belief that it takes about 8 to 10 months to seed a change in an organisation and have a community of practice yield tangible, demonstrable value. So let's say a year. That's a big investment, and often when you're looking at kind of something on a target operating model in a slide deck, it doesn't quite demonstrate the amount of effort needed for an organisation to kind of seed a community of practice and then give it the space and time to grow. So the first thing is make sure that there's kind of buy-in, understanding and acceptance of those things, and you've got kind of a very clear mandate to set up communities of practice. Like any good problem, I think it's important to articulate what a community of practice would solve, and that brings me on to the second part of setting up a community of practice. You've got to demonstrate and articulate that there's a problem in the business, and how a community of practice of people and experts swarming together to kind of help how they would fix that problem, and therefore the anticipated value of a community of practice. And it's almost sort of articulated as a case for change, to use a consultancy type term. You want to instill upon the organisation and the group of people that we've got a problem in the organisation, and kind of make sure that that's well understood in a language in a way that everyone understands, that's not business speak, and then kind of demonstrate how a community of practice would help resolve that. And this is starting to talk about the collateral and the material that you're going to need to build or write and author to start seeding across the organisation. And it starts with this case for change. So it's very clearly articulating, here's a problem in the business, and it may be, to use, we'll use my word like delivery management, that we don't have a good understanding as an organisation of what agile delivery means, yet we've got delivery managers that between them have 30, 40, 50, 60 years of experience. What we'd like is to get those people together and think about this as a group, and then be almost a guild, or almost a set of, you know, human fleshy guardrails. So for anyone wanting to understand agile delivery, these folk would be able to provide focused understanding and communicating techniques and skills and tactics, and, you know, instead of one expert, it's a number of them, and the idea is that they help the organisation as a whole, and as a collective, that hive mind is way more powerful than an individual expert. And the idea is that you get pragmatism, you get balanced thinking, and over time you'll get more value. So I've given an example there of what a delivery kind of community of practice should be, but in your particular field, whether it's architecture or software engineering, think about what the problem is that you're trying to solve, rather than just getting a group of people together, because that's just a meetup, right? So think about what the community of practice is, what its manifesto is, and the problems that it's trying to solve, almost the reason for it to exist. So now we're going to talk about the structure of the community of practice itself, and starting to think about how to configure them. So I personally think any community of practice should be between kind of 6 and no more than 10 people. I think once you go beyond 10, there's a lot of emphasis needed on the ways of working and the processes, and you start to get internal community just things to manage, and it can often become too complicated. So I think the sweet spot I've found, and, you know, I'm not suggesting I'm an entire end-to-end expert, it's just that in the communities of practice that I've set up, anywhere between 8 and 10 people, maybe a few more dependent on the nuance, but broadly speaking, you kind of want a fairly small group. And within that group, you'll want a central person to lead that community of practice. And that leading is often taking responsibility for how that community of practice is seeded in the business, how they interface with other groups, how they disseminate information, how they the output, the collateral that comes from this community of practice. That central person has to be nominated and has to be present and has to take accountability for the community of practice to work. Otherwise, what you get is just a group of people. And the very notion of a community of practice is that reminder that that community of practice exists for the people in it. So that central kind of person, leader, or whatever it is you choose to call them, they're going to constantly cajole and bring together the people, whether that's physical meetups, whether that's get-togethers, but just to be that constant driving force that as a community of practice, maybe a reminder of manifestos that you've set up, which I'll talk about, or you kind of what you're there to do. That central person should be that reminder constantly, and should be a person that everyone in the community of practice can go to if they have, you know, ideas or comments or criticisms, or they need help, advice, or have an idea on how to make the community of practice better. You do need someone at the centre of that to help kind of form and then drive it forward. So the kind of third thing is making sure that you've got someone at the centre of each community of practice that you set up to basically run the community. So the next thing is thinking about the commoditization of what you're doing, and a lot of people don't like this, but I'm a big believer in doing yourself out of a job, and a community of practice is the start of commoditizing a subject matter into a turnkey kind of thing that people can access as much as you can think about it as a product off the shelf as possible. Now, that's not to devalue either individuals or disciplines or the complexities of things like software engineering, and some people have a really hard time of understanding this, but in the cold, harsh realities of the kind of world that we live in, organizations, businesses and clients seek to kind of have as easy a turnkey kind of approach to everything around technology. And this is why you're getting so much kind of popularity with low-code solutions from the likes of Microsoft and others, because it's this kind of turnkey approach to dealing with day-to-day business matters and problems, and not necessarily hemorrhaging hundreds of thousands of pounds on proprietary and bespoke IT solutions. That's not to say that there's nothing wrong with doing that if there's a use case for it, but in this case of kind of a community of practice, you want to think of yourselves as a product. So as a product, and thinking of yourselves as a product, which is a bit of a mindset shift, you think, well, what do I want to know about a product? I want to know things like how much it costs. I want to know how it works. I want an instruction manual on how to use it. I want to know if it's compatible with what I'm doing, and I want to know the features and benefits. And these are the things that if you think about any product, whether it's a car, whether it's something, I don't know, you buy off a shelf, these are the things that often you'll want to know. So it applies exactly the same to a community of practice. So you need to start think about building the collateral, that the kinds of collateral needed to articulate as a product who you are. So again, using my example, we're a delivery management function. So I think about I'm a service line to the business, and if you want to know about delivery, or you want someone to take responsibility for delivering a thing, you can come to our pool of experts, our community of practice, and you can pick one based on certain skill sets. Maybe we've got DMs that are good at mobilizing projects, maybe we've got DMs that are good on the discovery bit, maybe we've got DMs who are particularly hot on just the churn of a project over a long period of time and just keeping things stable. So almost like picking from a menu, the first thing I want to do is make sure that everyone that engages with us knows the capability that we have. So across the 10 or 12 people that we've got kind of a skills map, so people can see at a glance, almost like battle cards. We've got skills in this area, we don't in this area. You want to come to us if you want to know about this, but you shouldn't come to us if you want to know about this, because we're not the experts in that field. So it's almost this kind of signpost of, firstly, why would you want to come to us as a group of people? So you need to think, when you're building a community of practice, I guess the need, we talked about that earlier, the reason for you to exist, and then start to think of yourself as a product and creating this collateral. And it's going to be a combination of kind of diagrams and slide decks, but the other thing is it's important that you create this kind of digital front door, and this is a really quite pertinent term. I think it works really well. The idea is, if you're a product and the community of practice is one of many sitting in a store, again using that kind of product kind of thinking, you go into a store, don't you, to pick. So you need that front door, and that front door is typically a digital front door. Every organisation is going to be using a tool like Confluence or SharePoint or Yammer or any of the other kind of information repository and communication tools that they'll have. But let's just say, for example, it's going to be SharePoint, because that's what most organisations are going to have. So as part of the intranet, I'd want to see as delivery management capability or a community of practice that if you're new to the organisation or you're browsing what the business can do and the services that it offers, for my group of folk, there is a front door to say, here's who we are, here's what we do, here are the things that you can expect from us, here are the things that you shouldn't expect from us. And that's really important too, because this is a point where you can create the rules and the terms of engagement. Often organisations really struggle with the lack of demarcation of who is doing what. So this is an opportunity to kind of set your stall out, basically. Again, more kind of sales and product references there, but it absolutely is true. So you're going to need to create some kind of SharePoint front door that details kind of who you are, what you do. Here are the people in the community of practice, practical things like contact details and who you should go to for particular things, who are subject matter experts in certain fields. Maybe you want to create a pathway of here's how you start engaging with us, and here's what you can expect during that engagement, and then here's where we'll pass you off and hand you over to somewhere else. So you're going to start to think about needing to visualize that. You're going to need to start to think about how you ingest requests or field questions and queries. That can be ad hoc, it can be face-to-face, it can be via email. You probably want to think about, and again, I did say in this, I would talk about specifics and practical things. You probably want a community of practice to have its own dedicated mailbox. So in this case, delivery managers at the name of your organisation. That gives a clear kind of central point that people can kind of hit. Maybe at bigger scale, you'll have a phone number. And maybe you'll triage that using automation. So in some of the communities of practice that I've set up or been involved with setting up, we've used Microsoft Flow and Power Automate to triage inbound requests through something as simple as an online form embedded into a SharePoint site. And the idea being that based on their request, that's then triaged to a certain person. It might create a ticket in a ticketing system, for example, which you can do, or it may just spit an email out to someone particular. What you're doing there is making sure that the person engaging with you has a mechanism, a physical and practical mechanism to engage with you. And that's what separates kind of the community of practice from just going up to Steve in a particular department to say, hey, you know about this, can we have a coffee and talk about it? And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that the community of practice formalizes it a bit and allows you to scale a little bit more. So it's really important that you think about kind of now building out the rules of how to engage with the community of practice, creating a terms of reference. You might need a slide deck to kind of introduce the community of practice and what you're about. And you'll need to kind of make sure that that's available, findable, within the organisation so everyone knows. Because also you don't want that issue of people going, well, what do those group of people do? Or what are they about? Or they just kind of walk around with clipboards, but no one really knows what they do. Part of a community of practice, which we'll talk about later, is the branding and marketing of it. But certainly that's kind of point 4. You're going to need some kind of digital front door. You're going to need to articulate all these things, and you're going to need to start creating this collateral. So that brings me neatly on then to kind of marketing and kind of publicising the community of practice. So this is really quite alien to a lot of people, but it's an absolute key to seed a community of practice within an organisation. And a bit like social media, it takes consistency over time to generate some kind of awareness, and it doesn't happen quickly. And often what we see of communities of practice being seeded in organisations is that there's a bit of a hype cycle to start with, where everyone's talking about it, everyone's buoyed up to kind of do the things, and then it kind of really tails off. And that's because there's not enough effort being put into continuous marketing. So what do I mean by continuous marketing? Well, for a community of practice to exist, for any community to exist, just kind of look at, I don't know, use an example like a Facebook group. As a group of people, you need to create a buzz, and that might be the things that you do. So as a community of practice, you will want to be involved in your industry or your particular kind of discipline, and you need to be publicly involved, and maybe you're going out doing public talks to kind of demonstrate the value and expertise of the people in the community of practice. Maybe you're doing thought leadership via blog posts or webinars or videos or podcasts and all this kind of stuff, and you will create a set of mixed kind of format assets that person at the centre of the community of practice is going to be responsible for kind of distributing through the company. In other organisations, we've used tools like Yammer to be able to kind of create a sense of identity. So here's what the folks in our community of practice were doing this week, here's what they did last week, here's a video of them helping an organisation solve a problem, and if you've got a similar problem, then here's what you can come to us for. And it creates that 360 kind of reference of engagement, value, and here's what we're about. And that really takes time, it takes money, and it takes effort and focus, and most organisations don't have the time. They expect a community of practice, and we'll talk about measurement next, to exist and then start fixing all the things. And actually part of it is the amplification of identity and that sense of being, belonging, and why the community of practice exists. And that's why I reckon it can take 8 to 9 months of real consistent doing this to be able to see that you're almost like part of the furniture within the organisation. Here is where you go for delivery, and that's what I've tried to do with our delivery managers, I guess, is to create not only a sense of there's a good group of people there, but also that at the centre of them there's someone that can help you. And whether you want to get into delivery management, maybe you want to know more about it, or maybe you want us to fix a particular problem, it's that knowing who to go to is really, really important. And that's taken a long time to kind of build. It's almost social collateral, right? And you might amplify that and augment that with what you do online and digitally, whether it's content, thought posts, podcasts, videos, whatever. But it's important that you seed that community of practice over time, and you don't change it. You might change a few of the members as people come and go, but as a thing, you want to get it to a point where it exists on its own, in its own right. And it's only then, when you've built a community of practice where it stands by itself regardless of the people, that the frameworks and the processes and the way you engage are so mature and seamless. You don't think about it. So it's really important, and this is kind of my fifth point. So market what the community of practice is, and how you do that is up to you, using the things that we've talked about already, but it's really important that you think about marketing. So we will talk about measurement of a community of practice and how you can measure success and progress, but I did want to just fit in while I was talking about marketing is, well, you then need to create that buzz over time. So you're now starting to get into like proper marketing, and you might need an expert to help you with this. But think about, over the course of 6 to 12 months, diarising events in relation to how that community of practice can help the wider organisation. For us, we do lots of lunch and learns about topics, and we try and seed those into calendars over a longer period of time. We might do videos, we might do podcasts, we might do events and summits and seminars, and you can think about doing this with your own community of practice, and by committing to them across a diary over time, not only does that give you something to market, going back to the last post, here's what you can expect from us over the next 12 months, but also it makes you commit. One of the things that you'll need to do, and that leader will need to do, is commit to the work involved. And by having diarised events, as a group of people, you're going to be held accountable for doing those things, right? Because as a community of practice, you don't want to say you're going to do something on a certain date and then you don't do it, because that just looks rubbish. So think about kind of diarising whatever is relevant for your particular field of expertise. So if it's architecture or engineering, it might be lunch and learns and keynote speeches or panel speakers around a particular area of architecture. And those that are interested across the organisation can drop in. If you want to be really slick, you can then kind of go external too, and then you kind of change the community of practice almost into like the feeling of a skunk works of experts that, we won't talk about what a skunk works is, you either know or you don't, you can Google, I'll put a link somewhere. But going externally really does help fortify that expertise too. It galvanizes kind of who you are as a group of experts and gives you independent kind of identity. Now, you need to do this quite carefully within the organization, but if you're a group of solid experts with real industry experience, there's no reason why you can't leverage the industry, learn from the industry, and you can be that conduit between external and internal into the organization, and you can be a real asset. And that's where you start to get real value of being a community of practice. So think about what's relevant for your particular discipline and how you might engage with other vendors or partners, and then you might get together and do panel discussions or Q&As or podcasts, and then you can circulate those, you can market those. But again, hopefully you're starting to get a sense now that all this stuff takes time. So building that community of practice, you need to think about all these things. So we've talked a lot over the course of this video around the things that you need to do. We've talked about kind of thinking about why you exist, making sure that you've got buy-in from the organisation and the people, that you've got the time and the commitment and the money to be able to do this stuff. We've talked about articulating why you exist, bringing the people together around a central leader. We've talked about how you market why you exist and the types of things that you'll need to do to market that, creating collateral, podcasts, lunch and learns, panel discussions, all that kind of stuff. We've talked about kind of how to work within the business and how you might configure yourselves, and we've talked about the amount of people that typically make a community of practice work. And we've also talked about kind of leveraging, if you get really good, kind of outside industry too, to kind of galvanize and fortify you as a group of experts. And we've skipped over sort of, well, at some point, you know, someone's going to ask, well, how do you measure it? And we want to know, all this time that we've spent, are you just a group of people kind of pontificating and talking about this stuff, or actually is there value in it? So how do you create a measurement or a set of measurements? So it's really difficult, and it's a bit like it's often non-tangible value over time, which businesses hate, right? Because they need to invest money and time into something, and they need to see a result, and they want to know when they're going to see that result. And this is a little bit more opaque because we're dealing with human beings, but there are a few things that I've learned to do that can work. So firstly, let's talk about kind of the marketing and the stuff that you do. And maybe one of the issues in your organisation is a lack of awareness over a certain thing. In my case, it might be delivery management. In your case, it might be architecture. You can use tools like Yammer or the metrics in SharePoint for a particular document to see how many times a document's been accessed, or how many people have liked the content, or how many people have engaged via comments, and all of that using Yammer as an example. And I do think Yammer, although it's a little bit old now, is still a massively underused and misused tool. It does brilliant metrics in terms of engagement, and you can use that as part of a set of measurements over time to demonstrate the value of your community of practice. The other things that I've learned work really well is having almost like a board executive meeting periodically. So maybe every 3 months, an opportunity to play back to the business. Here's us as a community of practice, the challenges that we took on for that particular quarter and what we did to solve them. And here are the success results. And it may be some talking head video testimonials. It might be Yammer engagement. It might be, here's a document that was accessed 350 times on SharePoint, looking at the analytics. So we know that it's been read and been engaged with. They are the metrics that often you need to tell a story, and again, it's this person at the center of the community of practice that will often do that. So think about having almost like it's like a show and tell or an executive board to make sure that you play back to the business, here's who we are and what we've done, and then what we're going to do next. And I think that's really important in terms of measurement. When we talk about the problems that you might want to solve as a group of people, like anything, you're going to want to track and triage how you pick off problems within the organisation that are relevant to you that you might want to tackle. So you'll need some kind of task management tracking tool. Why not use what they use in pretty much all organisations? You can bastardize either Jira or as your DevOps, but you want to create a backlog of stuff. And we're obviously not, this is not an agile thing, but you want somewhere to kind of put these things. You might use a Trello board, you might use Jira, but ultimately what you want is a facility to kind of articulate tasks in a backlog to be able to show the size of the problem, and there's another measurement. If you use a task management tool like Jira or Azure DevOps, you can then start using the inherent reporting in that to kind of show progress at your next board retro sort of session that I talked about just a moment ago. So you can move tasks along the board like you would any other project, and you can start to assign those tasks to folks within your community of practice and get a bit of a kind of a backlog going and working, and you can track progress over time using the notion of burn down. You can track the amount of tasks that you're tackling as a community of practice, and therefore the value, plus the ones that you've done. And providing you wrap that up in a really sort of decent narrative, you can play back to the business, look, as a group of people, we came together to solve these 6 problems in the organisation over the next 12 months. We're 3 months in, and here's what we've tackled, here's the evidence of that. So we heard, this is what we did, and this was the outcome. That kind of format you want to think about. And then every 3 months, hopefully you're showing progress to everyone. And this creates collateral that you can then market, and that's where you get that 360 loop of value. So it's really important that when you're thinking about measurements, that you're using tooling that's available to you to kind of help with that. But mostly it's about storytelling and your ability to kind of do that. And that's why it's really important. And I'll finish on a community of practice needs that kind of centralized leadership. So hopefully that was useful in terms of having a bit of a chat about communities of practice. And again, I'd spoken to a peer and a colleague and a friend of mine who'd asked a similar question, and I've done it a few times before, put some thoughts in an email and thought, do you know what, I want to talk about this. So if you're watching this, fantastic, but do listen to the podcast link somewhere, and I'll talk about this audio version that you can listen to on your drive home or whatever, and hopefully that's useful. If you want to get involved in the conversation, follow me on Twitter. Like I've said, @MarioDC is probably the Twitter account to follow, and if you've got any comments, do please leave them. It'd be great to hear from you. Hope that was useful, and have a really, really good day. Thanks.